Uh-oh. Gotta remember how to do this. There we go. Welcome in, latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on the Twitter. And there he is, Steven Lassan, senior editor, Athlon Sports. Steven, how you doing, buddy?
Mike, I'm doing great. What a weekend of games. We've got games between rivals this week. We've got Thanksgiving. We've got some portal chatter. We've got coaching chatter. So it's just a buffet of SEC ball, college football talk. It doesn't get much better than that, right?
It doesn't, Steven. And could you have, in your wildest dreams, imagine we'd be sitting here. I mean, this is after, all off season, all season long. People are sitting here saying, how do we make the playoff? Can we get in the playoff? How many SEC teams can we get in the playoff? Now we got 1 week to go, and we're saying, man, we may not have any teams, aside from 2 or 3, that get into the college football playoff. What a wild weekend last weekend was.
I mean, what a difference a week makes. I mean, last week there was talk maybe we could see 5 teams from the SEC get in, and now it's looking like 3 at best 4. Just kind of a crazy weekend of games. I would not have picked, all 3 potential contenders outside of Texas and Georgia to lose. I think there was a chance that 1, 2, but not all 3 to lose was pretty surprising. So maybe in the grand scheme of things, and we'll certainly see over the next couple of years how this plays out. But I do think getting rid of divisions, also deeper conferences. I mean, the depth in the SEC is ridiculous compared to some of the other leagues. Looking at you, Big Ten, because you got 4 good teams and a whole lot of questions after that. But I do wonder, we'll get into, I know, the offseason. At some point, there will be an 8 versus 9 debate in conference games. And I wondered Saturday, as the upset started to fall, if that may cool some of the 9-game conference game talk. Does that make sense?
No, without a doubt, because again, we're already at 8. We're knocking each other's off from possible playoff contention. But all that means is those Gamecocks are rising. Bama may not be done. Ole Miss might not be done. Hell, throw Missouri in there while we're at it. You know what I mean? Like, you may not be eliminated, but we've already gone far enough, Stephen, where we got your updated playoff projections. We got panic meter. We got a preview with all these great games. But before we get to all that, got to remind the cousins, as always, we're brought to you by MyBookie Online Sportsbook. Head on over to mybookie.ag today. If you haven't already, it's not just college football. They got all the sports covered over at MyBookie. And you put in that promo code, that SEC, THAT SEC, whenever you throw in your initial deposit, they will double whatever you throw in there today, just for the cousins out there, with that promo code, that SEC, over at MyBookie.ag. But, Stephen, the world may be coming to an end because Cousin Shane's doing graphics now. So here's the first graphic. Shout out Cousin Shane for doing the graphic. So before we get into all that, I had to throw it your way, and I apologize if you're just listening back later, but Cousin Shane's graphic, I'll read it to you. Who do you want to start a dynasty with? Should have got clarification if he's talking about the video game or if he's talking in real life. I think he was talking about in real life here, but he's only got 4 guys, and they're all outstanding, and I'm already seeing the outcry. Why isn't this guy there? Why ain't that? Hey, thankfully, you guys can't come at me with this stuff. This is a Cousin Shane graphic, so you'll have to chew him out about it on the next episode. But here are the options, Stephen. Who would you start a dynasty with? Arch Manning of Texas, Lenore Sellers, South Carolina, DJ Lagway, Florida, and of course, the Tennessee Homer. Cousin Shane was not going to do a graphic like this and not put Nico on there out of Tennessee. So if these are your only choices, Stephen, you got to pick one. Who would you start a dynasty with? Who's your answer here?
Man, we're starting off a Thanksgiving week Monday show with the hardest question maybe of the season, right? Like 4 deserving choices. I think Nico's going to get a lot better next year. So while he may not be in the same potential like development class right now is Lagway and Arch. I think he'll take a step forward next year. But I actually probably would lean probably Arch Manning almost just on the talent upside, family kind of genes kind of thing. Certainly, I wouldn't argue with you if you chose Lenora Sellers based upon the last 2 months of the season. I think going into next year, just based upon who is proven, if the draft class with Milroe and Nussmeier, we'll see how they play out. But Sellers is going to be a top, I mean, at least 10, maybe even 5 quarterback in the country to start next year. And of course, it is very easy to be impressed by DJ Lagway. Just the throws that he made in the game on Saturday against Ole Miss, defenders hanging off of him, sort of flat-footed, rifling passes, 20, 25 yards down the field is very impressive, and just the impact that he's made. So I might go Arch, DJ Lagway, Lenore Sellers, and then Nico. But there's no bad choice in that discussion.
Steven, you and the people in the comments, I've seen all these front runners with Arch Manning. Texas has taken over the SEC. They've taken over this damn show, quite frankly, Steven. Everybody's going with Arch, but no, I kid. I mean,
who would you go with, Mike?
Arch might be awesome, but I would have to say DJ Lagway. I think he's the easy answer. Again, he's not played as much as Nico. He's not even played as much as Sellers. Yet, to me, he looks like the chosen one here that that people are trying to make Arch out to. Now, that doesn't mean the others are bad, or like you said, there's no wrong answer here. But Sellers to me is a very, very, very close second. I actually think Sellers, he's being. I've even done it. I've said Cam Newton. I don't think he's Cam Newton. I think he's more like Tim Tebow. He's a tank of a human being. He can run better than DJ based on what I've seen. But I think DJ can throw it a little bit better. And again, just slightly here, but give the slight edge to DJ. He has given new life to Billy Napier's Florida Gator program, and I couldn't be more impressed. Hell, I thought Florida was going to get their ass whooped by Ole Miss. Instead, it was Florida doing the whipping, and that's multiple weeks in a row here. I picked against Florida, and they've gotten it done. So I could not be more impressed with DJ Lagway. Could not be more impressed with old Billy Napier for turning this season around. And shout out Brodo Baggins in the comments. How about this one, Steven? I wanted to give a shout out to him. He said, could you imagine? No one could have imagined Alabama and Florida having the same amount of conference wins with 1 week left in the season. Of course, Alabama still got one more conference game, so they could finish higher than Florida. But that is an amazing statistic. And real quick, I also wanted to shout out Tim, cousin Tim. Welcome to the family. But Steven, I mean, is there again? We were a little bit higher on Florida than some, and it took damn near 2 months for that to be validated. But still, you've got to be impressed with the Gators, how they're playing right now.
Oh, 100%, Mike. I mean, it's now 2 weeks in a row they have knocked off a ranked opponent. And it's not just the victories, it's how they're winning. Earlier in the season, I think fair to be skeptical of their defensive improvement because of the offenses. Like when you're shutting down Kentucky, that's one thing. When you're getting the timely stops you need to beat Ole Miss, when you're causing havoc against LSU's offensive line, that's totally different scenario. They have stepped up on defense over the second half of the season. And of course, the DJ Lagway factor too. I just think he has it. And it's sort of like hard to put into words, but when you watch him play, the confidence lift that he gives this offense and also the ability to stretch the field. Graham Mertz was very good at the efficiency, short stuff. Lagway is great about being able to push the ball downfield. He's got some development to do kind of on the short game, but Napier did a great job to keep this team together considering all the circumstances. They were the hot seat talk after the first couple weeks of the season, but they just kept hanging in there. They've been getting better on defense, and now Lagway coming back was kind of the missing piece and all that. So really impressed with the job that Billy Napier has done this year, and I think there's a good chance this carries over into the offseason. We see that on the recruiting trail. We could see that in the portal. This Florida team with DJ Lagway, I know it's early, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're maybe a preseason top 25 team next year.
Well, you know who's in my top 25? Hell, he's in my top 5 here, Steven. He's a playoff lock. Maybe we ought to do that. Maybe we ought to do a playoff bracket of the cousins out here. But Cousin JR, what a man. What a man. He has gifted another one, this time to Charlie Taylor. Charlie, welcome to the family. Thank you, Cousin JR. But yeah, I mean, top 25. I don't even know if that's enough for Florida Gators. and I'll tell you another one. There's a madman in here in the comments. JD, he's a big Auburn fan. He's telling me he just wrote in the comments. Steven, keep in mind he's on this show to hear us talk. He told me to shut the fuck up. While he's here, presumably to hear me talk. But shout out Auburn. I think Auburn, and it's got nothing to do with last week. Hell, I thought they'd lose last week too. I still don't think Hugh Freeze is a good coach. I don't know how anybody can watch him and be like, well, that guy's on it. He's won, what was he won? One home game this year over a Power 5. But anyway, I think Auburn, with what the talent they've assembled, what they're doing in the recruiting, I'm not saying they should be preseason top 25, but if they land a quarterback, and hell, they better after Hugh Freeze said we don't spend $1 million on a quarterback, they better spend their ass $1 million on a quarterback. If they do, if they get a good one, I guarantee you Auburn finishes as a top 25 team next year. What's your thoughts on that?
I could buy that. I think the quarterback position is the biggest area of intrigue for me, because when I look at that defense and I see some of the younger players playing, Cam Coleman, Malcolm Simmons, and I'm sure they'll find somebody at running back next year. They also have the unlucky factor of like the close games have gone against them at times. Now, some of that's self-inflicted mistakes, but generally that sort of evens out over a period of time where you would expect Auburn to win a couple of those close games. And at some point, if you accumulate so much talent, then the breaks probably start to go your way. So I think that's pretty reasonable. I am really fascinated to see what Auburn does at quarterback, because Deuce Knight he's going to be one of the top quarterback recruits in this year's class. Is he ready to start right away? Is it Walker White? Do they go get a portal quarterback to bridge the gap? Seems like to me you probably need a veteran to play next year. So I think Auburn better play in the portal. And I think the theme that I've already started to see is everybody in the SEC is going to try and play in the portal, which means everybody's competing for the same high-level players, which makes those NIL dollars and all that pretty valuable.
And next year, again, we shouldn't get too caught ahead looking to next year, but it's one of those years, Steven, where hell, you may beat Alabama and you're on cloud 9. But next year, you get Georgia and Alabama at home. Those are the years Auburn generally does well. And then the away SEC games, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, and A&M. I think A&M could be one of the best teams in the country next year.
Agreed.
But aside from that, very winnable road games. And quite frankly, Kentucky, I don't care where that game's played. You will be favored over as long as Mark Stoops is trending in the wrong direction. But again, the winnable home games as well. So schedule lines up well for Auburn next year.
Opener at Baylor will be interesting. I think Baylor could be a top 30, 35 team. Dave Aranda did some good things this year, saved his job. But non-conference against Ball State, South Alabama, and Mercer, that's a pretty favorable slate. And to your point, you're getting Missouri, Alabama, and Georgia all at your place next year. And, I would assume Vanderbilt probably finds a quarterback, whether it's Nate Johnson or someone else to replace Pavia. But yeah, that's a pretty favorable slate for a big step forward. If they don't, then there's real problems, because the roster is talented and the schedule should indicate some sort of improvement next year.
Brodo's called for Auburn to win the Iron Bowl so they can make the Jimmy Kimmel Bowl. Is that still a bowl, or is that a one-off?
So it's the Los Angeles Bowl, but it was Gronkowski last year. Like
Okay.
I don't know if Jimmy Kimmel's back on it this year. It's kind of
maybe it's the Cousin Shane Bowl. Who knows?
It actually Gronk hosted it last year. It says still hosted by Gronk on their website for this year. So
okay, it's hard-hitting analysis right there. All right. Speaking of analysis, so here's Steven's updated college football playoff projections here. And again, I say this every week. Hopefully, you cousins sense the theme here. Top four. It does not mean that the best four. This is an insane way they're doing this. I don't know who agreed to this. Greg Sankey and all your power. Why did you do this? I'll never know. But the top four are the highest rated conference champions. So Stevens projects Oregon number one as the Big Ten champ, Georgia number two as the SEC champ, Miami three as the ACC champ. And this is what I'm talking about. What are we doing here, Steven? Boise, I don't care what they're ranked, number 4 seed, they get automatic bye. Meanwhile, again, I'm not really going to fight for Alabama after that performance, but Ole Miss and Texas A&M and South Carolina are sitting at home while Boise is projected 4 seed in the quarterfinals. That's ridiculous, but it is what it is. And then number 5, Steven's got Ohio State hosting. This is another joke. Arizona State. We got to let these losers in here at the 12 seed. So we're basically and I get it. This format, this is not the finalized format or anything. But if it holds like this, Steven, all we're doing is we are ticketing Ohio State right to the semifinals. So again, the 5th seed is the best seed in the whole bracket. I would not want to be 1, 2, 3, or 4. I'd want to be number 5 because you're basically automatically getting to the semifinals. Steven's come around. He's got Tennessee in there, number 9, at Notre Dame, number 8. In first round would be at Notre Dame, Tennessee at Notre Dame. Texas, number 6 seed, hosting number 11, SMU. So Texas automatically into the quarterfinals. That's good to see. And then Penn State 7, Indiana 10 for the right to lose to Georgia in the next round. And then as far as the bubble teams, this is what I'm talking about, folks. It's devastating to see all the SEC in the bubble, but it is what it is. Bama, Ole Miss, A&M, and South Carolina still all alive. Going to need some upsets coming their way to get into the field. So, Steven, I'll shut up now. Tell me about your latest projections here.
Mike, you sound a little down this week about the playoff, so let me give you a little bit of optimism here. There was a ton of chaos last week, and it wasn't just, relegated to the SEC. Colorado lost to Kansas, Arizona State and BYU couldn't finish a football game cleanly, and that was pretty crazy. So what I would say is, like, if you're Alabama, you're Ole Miss, or you're South Carolina, you have to handle your business this week and hope for some chaos elsewhere. But there's a good chance that it's going to happen. I've got my eye on Miami and Syracuse. I've got my eye on Notre Dame going to USC. Those are some games that could shake up this bracket. SMU's got to play California. SMU's a heavy favorite, but we've seen crazy things happen. So I don't think we're done with the upsets. But right now we are trending towards 3 teams from the SEC with a potential 4th. I think the question to watch on Tuesday night's rankings is how the committee orders Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. Because South Carolina does not have the head-to-head victories against Ole Miss or Alabama, but you could argue they're playing maybe better than both teams, and they have a Clemson team that will be probably in the top 15 or so of the rankings on Tuesday night. So if South Carolina is ahead of those 2 teams and beats Clemson, all of a sudden a 4th SEC team that is South Carolina getting into the playoff becomes a very viable path. So that's what to watch on Tuesday night. But I think for the other teams, Tennessee, Georgia, Texas, you win this week, you're in basically.
Mm-hmm. And Steven and I were talking off air right before we went on. Yes, we do have conversations off air, but they're pretty X-rated. But we were talking about if A&M were to beat Texas, again, huge if, we believe Texas A&M would jump into the bracket. Texas would stay in the bracket, and the winner obviously goes to the SEC championship. But in this scenario, we're saying A&M wins it. They go to the SEC championship, and they're going to be an underdog to Georgia. Even if they fall, Steven and I suspect A&M will remain in the college football playoff. Do I have that right?
Yes, I think there is a very, very strong chance that happens because I just look at kind of the math of this. and Texas A&M being, around 15, 16 in the rankings, whereas Texas is going to be a top 3 team
Mm-hmm.
on Tuesday night. If you're beating a top 3 team and you're playing in the SEC championship game, and if it's close to Georgia, if that's the scenario, that only helps the argument for Texas A&M. So I think if they beat Texas, I think they will be in the field, the rankings going into the SEC championship game.
Do you think that's the cleanest way that we get 4 SEC teams in there, or is there another perhaps like Notre Dame losing to Southern Cal, perhaps that, maybe Indiana or Penn State dropping a game? What is the easiest path you think for the SEC to get 4 in the field?
I think maybe the easiest path is for the ACC to kind of beat up on each other.
Mm-hmm.
So Miami, I mentioned Miami plays at Syracuse. If they lose that game, Clemson will go to the ACC championship. And I think what you want to hope for is South Carolina to beat Clemson. So that way Clemson is down the order. Miami's losing to Syracuse. So then the ACC only gets one team in. Then the question becomes, for that open spot, is it an Alabama with 3 losses? Is it South Carolina? Or maybe is it Texas A&M? That's the debate I think we could have if that chaos happens in the ACC, which it's not crazy at all. I mean, Syracuse could absolutely beat Miami this weekend and shake up the whole bracket.
Mm-hmm. And I realize they don't do it this way, Stephen. They don't ask for our opinion or anything like that. They probably should. But we're talking the teams on the bubble. And I think you've already answered this, but I'm asking it anyway. If Alabama, Ole Miss, A&M, South Carolina, and the committee can only take one, and we're not looking at resumes, we're not looking at who beat who, we're not looking at the logos. If you were just taking the team today that you think most deserves to be in the playoff field, would it be South Carolina?
Man, if we're just going off like how teams are playing right now, yes. If you ask me who I think the best team is of that 4, it's probably Ole Miss. This team is like 2 plays away from having 1 loss this year. If they
Right.
just stopped Kentucky and LSU on 4th down, they could easily be a 1-loss team at this point. So if they all played tomorrow, I would probably guess Ole Miss emerges out of that. Alabama's probably got the best resume in terms of wins. The committee has liked the fact that they've had the 3 or 4 top 25 wins, depending on which teams are in the top 25 at that point. But to your point, South Carolina's probably playing as well as or better than any of those teams, and they've already beaten Texas A&M, and they lost by 2 points to Alabama on the road.
Mm-hmm. Well, Stephen, he's also got his updated bowl projections. And speaking of whiffing, go from the playoff to the Music City Bowl. Oh, buddy. Stephen, tell us about your updated SEC bowl projections.
We have a ton of changes this week in the bowl projection. So we'll start with Alabama in the Citrus Bowl. They were in the college football playoff projections last week. They've dropped down to the Citrus Bowl against Illinois and Burt. So that would probably be a pretty big disappointment for Alabama fans to be going to the Citrus Bowl. We also got Baylor and LSU still in the Texas Bowl. It's a replica of last week's projection. In the Gator Bowl, Louisville, Texas A&M, be a pretty interesting matchup if it works out like that. Of course, I think A&M fans have their sights set on something a lot higher than the Gator Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
The First Responder Bowl got Vanderbilt and North Texas. Kind of tricky here because Oklahoma winning plus the playoff chaos, the SEC has too many bowl teams for their eligible bowl slots. This was a few weeks ago. There wasn't enough SEC teams eligible for bowl games. Now there are too many. So First Responder Bowl, there could be a couple other bowl games that open up, but that's where we got Vanderbilt this week. You mentioned it, Mike. Ole Miss in Nebraska in the Music City Bowl, and probably an easy sellout for the good folks at the Music City Bowl. Nebraska got bowl eligible by beating Wisconsin on Saturday. There was a huge party in Lincoln on Saturday night after that all-important 6 victory. Down in the ReliaQuest Bowl, Iowa versus South Carolina. Las Vegas Bowl, Washington versus Missouri. Liberty, Kansas State versus Florida. Florida moving up the bowl projections. If they win this week, might move up another spot or two in the pecking order. And two more. We've got the Gasparilla Bowl, North Carolina versus Oklahoma. Welcome to the bowl projections, Oklahoma. And in the Birmingham Bowl, Memphis versus Arkansas.
And just judging by the comments, Steven, everybody's pissed. Everybody, you don't make the playoff, get the hell out of here with these bowl games. But I'll still line up and watch them. You know what?
Oh, I can take anything. I can scout a bowl game. I mean, what wasn't one of the best things in last year's bowl games getting to see like Nico and some of the younger players play for like the first time in extended roles?
Right. Yeah, for Tennessee. Yeah, then that served a lot of the preseason hype for sure.
Yeah, I think that is kind of what I always take away from bowl games now is they're kind of like a postseason exhibition. And it's a good opportunity to see some of the younger players play for the first time in some extended snaps because you can't read anything into some of these games that 10 players have opted out. But still, college football, remember, the bowl games mean there's only one more game for that team. We got to enjoy it.
Cousin Todd says, you're out of the family, Steven. He's a Gamecock. He wants a better bowl than what you gave him. How dare you?
I think that by picking South Carolina in the ReliaQuest, that is the second selection out of the playoffs. So that's Alabama and the Citrus would be the first, and South Carolina in the second. So
yeah. They said you're married in. You're not a real cousin. All right. So now, how about Steven? Favorite feature? I've already seen other shows starting to rip this off, Steven. It's such a hit. The panic meter here in the SEC. I was ready to trash the panic meter about a week ago, Steven. I said, I think people are panicked out. I mean, how much more panic can you possibly have when we're final week of the season? And then last week happened, and good Lord, I mean, panic galore. So who tops the panic meter right now?
SEC Mike, a 10 for the playoff. Maybe I'm panicked because I'm out of the family now. I'm going to have to work my way back into this. No, in all seriousness, let's start with Alabama. I've got them at a 10. I'm not really sure that a 10 is justifiable. I mean, you could almost go higher than that. Let's play a little word game association, Mike. Let me give you 4 words, and you tell me if this is like crazy to talk here for Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
This describes how they played on Saturday night. They were outcoached. They looked unprepared. They looked flat, and that was incredibly disappointing if you're an Alabama fan.
Right, and it seemed like they had no answers for Oklahoma, which appeared to be doing a poor man's version of Vanderbilt Diego Pavia.
Yeah.
You know, and again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Arnold and Oklahoma's offense, but they have shown nothing this entire. I mean, yeah, they had some success against Missouri, but there was defensive touchdowns in there. They showed a pulse against Ole Miss, but and then quite frankly, I mean, even in this one, they scored a defensive touchdown. So we're talking about an offense that can't even get to 20 points, yet you lost by 21. I mean, this with everything in front of you, the SEC and a championship. People were calling you a favorite to make the playoff, to win the SEC, to do everything you want, and now I don't know, Steven. I mean, the more we get like this, again, I try not to overreact, but I don't know how in the world you can watch results like this and sit here and say, you know, Caleb DeBoer, he's the right man for the job. I mean, it's the exact opposite. It's certainly, I don't know how anyone can look at this and not say it appears that he is ruining what was the program in all of college football.
I think the alarming thing to me, if I was an Alabama fan, is the setup that you mentioned. Oklahoma had done not a whole lot on offense in SEC play. They have an interim offensive coordinator. They've had about 1,000 receivers get hurt this year. They have struggled to run the ball for the most part this season, and they pushed around Alabama's defense for 4 quarters at the line of scrimmage. That was pretty shocking to me. If anything, I think you could have made a case coming into Saturday that Oklahoma's defense will hang around, but Milroe and Alabama's offense will just eventually be too much. And instead, Alabama's offensive game plan was not good. I felt like Milroe was just kind of running into a brick wall for most of the night. The passing game was out of sync. There was the interceptions by Milroe as well. So I know Alabama had struggled on the road, of course, against Vanderbilt and some other times in the SEC this year, Tennessee. But they just came off that victory at LSU.
Mm-hmm.
And you thought that, okay, the defense has played better. They kind of fallen into a little bit of a rhythm offensively. And to just have a complete no-show with the SEC championship and playoff on the line is really shocking to me.
Right. And look, someone here in the comment, I love when I make the cousins mad. Steven, Freedom Van. Mike is just rage baiting with his DeBoer take. He's obviously going to do better. Well,
is this DeBoer's best team? I mean, in all seriousness, is this his best roster that he could have?
He will never have a better roster. And he inherited a quarterback that, what was he, 6th in the Heisman last year. And at times looks phenomenal. And then other times looks like he's never played. You know, it's like, yeah, you can't have it both ways. And Steven, how's a team like this, again, how do you get not beat by Oklahoma? How do you get dominated by Oklahoma? With your point, you just dominated LSU. How do you beat Georgia, which is the only team that's clinched in the SEC, maybe the eventual champion here, and then turn around and get beat by Vanderbilt? You're the last one to beat South Carolina. Probably should have lost that one too, but you're the last team to beat South Carolina. You blank Missouri, which is playing their best football right now, and then in between you lose to Tennessee. I mean, how is that not? I mean, that is coaching, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I going back to the days of Washington and Fresno State, I've always been really high on Kalen DeBoer and his ability to churn out points offensively. And obviously, SEC defenses are a different level than the Mountain West and some of those in the Pac-12. But just to be able to, when you inherited a quarterback of Jalen Milroe's talent and his ability, and you just saw what he did with Michael Penix at Washington, they're 2 totally different quarterbacks to some extent. But even if they are maybe not as talented at receiver as they have been, you just thought that, okay, this is what DeBoer has done with other quarterbacks. Like, surely they could get more out of him. And to see the inconsistencies on both sides of the ball, it's not that they lost, I think, to Oklahoma. Sometimes it's the fashion. Like when you score 3 points and you just look out-prepared and out-coached. And like we said, Oklahoma has really done nothing on offense in SEC play to give you the confidence they were going to be able to put up over 20 points. So a lot of things that out of this Alabama team that don't make sense. And some of it, I think a lot of it comes back to this coaching staff.
Mm-hmm. Cousin Benjamin said the only rage bait was Alabama's performance. And I agree 100%. We had a great one here from Cousin Steve-O. Appreciate you, Steve-O. Boomer Sooner. Just wanted to say that. Honestly, it feels good to win again. Thanks for the show, cuz. Fun with facts. Appreciate you. We appreciate you, Steve-O. What a win. What a win. Oklahoma. I mean, all of a sudden, that's a team we've been panicked about before, Steven, and not as panicked anymore. I mean, again, there's a lot to solve, but you can't tell me that Brent Venables didn't outcoach what was allegedly an elite coach. I mean, he went in that game, Steven, and it seems like they said, we are not going to let Jalen Milroe beat us, not with his legs. And that was a masterful game plan. Just absolutely suffocated a team that had a national championship in front of it and made them look. I mean, if you knew nothing about college football and you watch that game, you said, which one of those teams is playing for a national championship? You would have said the Sooners.
Yeah, that's just it. I mean, it's hard sometimes when you're watching the game from afar to get everything out of it. But I was just watching that game and I was like, where's the fire here? Like you're losing, 10-3 in the first half. And like the second half, like things were going downhill. It's like does Alabama know the whole season is at stake? And it's like, wake up, like your whole season could potentially be fallen by the wayside. I did want to give a little shout out here. We've talked about this guy all off season and in season, and this position group has had issues all year for Oklahoma. Bill Bedenbaugh, the young players on the offensive line, the transfers, all the chaos they've had week to week, they gave up just, one sack to Alabama and pushed Alabama around for 257 yards. I mean, he's taking his lumps this year for sure because the offensive line is underachieved, but man, that had to feel probably pretty good for Bill Bedenbaugh on Saturday night to see his offensive line push around Alabama. But also, like you said, Mike, I mean, Brent Venables, that was a masterclass in defensive game planning and just getting Oklahoma ready for this matchup on Saturday night. They completely outcoached Alabama.
Mm-hmm. Give him an extension. No, I'm just kidding. All right. All right. Who's next on the panic meter here?
We got to go to Ole Miss, another team that's lost with playoff implications. Mike, I mentioned it earlier, but I think you could boil this down to a couple things. Ole Miss is like 2 plays away from having one loss this year. If they stop Kentucky on 4th down, if they stop LSU on 4th down, we're having a completely different conversation. But I think counting the Florida game, it is a run of like missed opportunities for Ole Miss. They had their chances to win on Saturday, whether it was interceptions, finishing drives without points, getting stops in the Florida red zone. It's just a game that if you convert 1 or 2 of those and you don't throw one of those interceptions, Ole Miss maybe wins this game. And so I think it just sums up missed opportunities on Saturday, but also missed opportunities in the whole context of the season because this team was loaded and frankly should have made the college football playoff with the roster talent they have.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is going to be the classic example, Stephen. And again, I don't think that, I mean, this could make me look like an idiot, even more so than normally when I open my mouth. But I don't know that the strategy and everything that they did, I think people are going to be like, see, this is why you don't buy all these players. This is why you got to do it in high school, yada, yada, yada. I don't buy any of that. I think it's just what you said. I mean, there's just points in these games where they're either not executing or they're going for it too many times. They're getting a little too cute. What in the hell are they doing with the running back position? They got Bentley just sitting on his hands over there on the bench. But I think this was a team capable of winning a national championship, and I still think that. And that sounds crazy because they lost 3 games, but buddy, I mean, Kentucky got the 1 deep shot on them. That was the difference in the game. LSU, they basically dominated that entire football game, and LSU was better in overtime, and that was the difference in that one.
They let him hang around in the first half, though, when they had a chance to get touchdowns.
Right. And then even in this one, I thought Ole Miss was the better team, but they didn't make the plays. They were dropping passes. Jackson Dart went YOLO ball at the end of the game when he didn't have to. I mean, they got tight. And that is the story of Lane Kiffin. That is the story of Jackson Dart. That is the story of Ole Miss, even though, man, it was all right there in front of them. You know what?
I agree with you on the portal thing. I think it's hard to know the level of player that's going to get into the portal every year. And to the credit of Ole Miss, Jackson Dart's been there a couple of years. Some of their other players that come into the portal have been there for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. So they've been building to this point. I don't think they should go away from this strategy. In fact, I think that's probably the strategy that most teams that aren't recruiting top 5 or 10 classes are probably going to pursue. So I think as long as Ole Miss can make it work financially, it's probably makes sense to go that route. And if you think ahead a little bit, I mean, Austin Simmons is pretty promising. The little sample size that I've seen, kind of bring in the Walter Nolans and all those guys
right
here because everybody's going after him. So I think had they gone 8-4 and been blown out, we're talking something totally different. It's 3 very winnable games that they've just kind of fumbled away to kind of put it up, a basic statement on it. But right. I don't really understand the Ulysses Bentley thing. Like, to me, he's probably their best running back. And right now, I don't know why been completely invisible in the games for the last couple of weeks.
And instead, they're running their defensive tackle in critical situations and asking Jackson Dart to be the lead blocker. But I digress. How about comment of the night so far, Stephen? D-Pool, they should have done more fake injuries. Ever since the fake injuries, Sankey came out and said no more. Man, Ole Miss has been suffering. So that's an excellent point there. Excellent point.
Do you miss the fake injuries?
Not at all. No. I hated them.
Man, the pace of these games is so much better without the stoppage, like every 3 plays, right?
Yep. All right. Anyone else you're panicked about here, Steven?
One more. Let's throw out Texas A&M, just kind of on the same theme. They had a little bit of a missed opportunity here to beat Auburn, and then you could almost think about entrenching yourself in the college football playoff because of what's ahead. Instead, if they beat Texas, we think they'll be in the playoff by making the SEC championship game, but it's a little bit risky. They had a chance to win against Auburn and set up something bigger than that. So just a missed opportunity in a very winnable road environment. I think if you want to take a positive away from that, from A&M, just the fact they fell behind 21-0, and then Marcel Reed was able to get them back in the game on a passing game that we wanted to see take steps this season. That's probably a good sign for A&M going into the Texas game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I certainly didn't think they were capable of coming back down from 21-0 on the road against a good defense. That was the strength of Auburn's team is the defense. But but plays were there to be made. You can't let Auburn drive the length of the field for a game-tying field goal. A lot of I don't know if look ahead's the right word, but defenses. The pass defense is an issue now. They're not getting to the quarterback. There are certainly issues. Joe T, appreciate you. Will Mike Elko get an extension after he and the Aggies win the SEC championship, beat the hell out of the Horns, and them dogs gig up? if they win, yeah, he's getting an extension if they win the SEC. I don't know if he really would, but he would deserve one, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see a lot of these extensions after 1 or 2 years that are sort of just like fortifying, like recruiting, giving the coach more resources, giving the coach a little bit of a raise. So yeah, I mean, I think even if A&M falls short on Saturday night, I think it's still been a successful year. I mean, they've been in the top 25. They're in the playoff race. Certainly losing to Auburn and Texas wouldn't be the greatest way to close the season, but I think it would be a step forward, and it would be a successful one because it does feel like the program is definitely on track. And I think they've shown growth during the year after that loss to Notre Dame in the season opener.
Mm-hmm. I think the real panic was the way we decide overtime football games in college football, Steve, with this stupid 2-point conversion. Come on, get that out of here. I mean, how often do we even need that? It can't be more than how many times a year does that happen, you think?
I think it's got to be very few that games would go into like the 4th or 5th overtime. I guess I understand, like, on one hand, it's like trying to prevent a game from going 6-7 overtimes because A&M's got to turn around and play Texas. Like, I kind of get that, but then it's like, couldn't we do this after like the 4th overtime or something? It just seems like not enough time to go to the 2-point shootout. So
I hate it. I hate it.
Yeah. Let's get something different in there. Just like the playoff thing. Let's change the playoff rankings and the overtime rules this offseason.
All right. So anyone else you're panicked about?
I was going to ask you about Kentucky, Mike. I would probably put their panic meter not as high as Alabama or Ole Miss. I think obviously the Texas game is what it is. I think you still have a lot of questions about this offense going forward. I think Cutter Boley, needs to be the starter and is going to be the starter. I still wonder, offensive coordinator Bush Hamden, it sounds like Mark Stoops plans on keeping him next year. They really
goody.
Yeah. I think they really wasted some of these the defense and certainly some of these skilled players they had a receiver. So I think it's kind of a missed opportunity this year, at least to get to a bowl game. Is that fair?
I think so too. I mean, I did like what I saw from Boley. Again, it was one game. Defense was probably not prepared for him because how could they? I don't know that he's played it much at all. But that's something. That's something to build on. But yeah, they have weapons that they're not going to have next season. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm just beyond panic with them. I'm kind of, maybe if I am panicked, I'm panicked that they failed to score 20 points in every SEC game, first time since 1982. Yet we're good. We're bringing people back. I don't know that firing everybody is always the easy answer, but something's rotten down there in Lexington, and it's just all the juice is gone from that program. And I think the only reason we're bringing them back, I mean, it's clear as day. His $44 million buyout.
I thought Cutter Boley, for the small sample size, actually looked the best of any Kentucky quarterback I've seen throw the ball this year, because I think we kind of know what Gavin Wimsatt is. Vandergriff, I think you could say, well, he's been banged up. There's still some potential there, but Boley needs to. You got to find out what he is, because you're going into the portal session to try to figure out if you need another starter at quarterback or if you can go on him. So with the players departing, this feels like a pretty big offseason for Mark Stoops. We brought back the offensive line coach. The offensive line hasn't been great this year. So there's a lot of, I think, uncertainty for this team going into the offseason, more so than, I don't know, maybe last couple of years at least.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, Steven, anyone else before we get to the previews?
I think that's it for the panic meter for now.
We're beyond panic.
Beyond panic, yeah.
Well, I'm beyond panic for this one, Steven. Texas A&M here. What a showdown of all the hype we've had here for years and years and years. This one is somehow looking to exceed the hype because playoff on the line. SEC championship on the line. What's your early read on this one, Steven?
It is just fantastic, great, unbelievable, awesome, whatever way you want to describe it. It's just awesome to have this rivalry back, and it's an SEC conference game. So I'm just fired up to see Texas and Texas A&M with the helmets, the logos on the same field for the first time in what seems like forever. So sorry to nerd out there for a minute, as just I'm excited to have the rivalry back. Obviously, I think the stakes are incredibly high here for both teams. Texas is, I think, one win away from clinching a spot in the playoff. A&M, chance to go to the SEC championship game in Mike Elko's first year. That's a big deal for this program. One of the biggest, probably, home games for Texas A&M in a long time, with everything at stake. I think what will be interesting for both teams is how do they manage sort of the emotions of the game too. I suspect that there's going to be a lot of energy and a lot of, players are going to be fired up on Saturday night, and you don't want to get like a cheap, personal foul penalty or anything like that. So as much as we focus on the like X's and O's in these matchups, I do think sort of managing the emotions of the rivalry is going to be crucial too, because Texas is walking into a tough environment. You've got A&M who's going to be hyped up with Texas coming in. So I'll be watching that early to see which team can kind of settle in to the flow of the game. Just in the personnel matchups, I'm interested to see how A&M's pass rush, can they affect Quinn Ewers? He's got the ankle injury. He wasn't really moving around well against Kentucky. Can they affect him? Because Auburn threw the ball pretty well against the secondary. If he's got time to throw, I think there are going to be some plays that Ewers and these receivers can make on Texas A&M.
Any shot Texas pulls on Mike Elko and plays the other quarterback, though. Again, not because I know some of the Texas fans, they've been out on Ewers for, I don't get it. But, yeah, I mean, he's not looked like $1 million, but he is banged up. And again, we both believe, I kind of hate that we even have to say stuff like this, but I think it's the truth. We try to tell the truth here. If Texas were to lose this game, I don't think it eliminates them from anything. I mean, they're number 3 in the playoff. I mean, they're not going to skyrocket down. So do you consider, I don't know if resting is the right word, but just, even if you do start Ewers and let's say it's a slow start or he's just still kind of nagging injury, would you make the switch knowing that unless the only way, and I don't even think this is possible, but the only way I could see Texas getting booted out of the playoff is like if they got humiliated and even then I think they're not going to fall out of the playoff. So would you consider a quarterback change at all just based on the fact that one guy's healthy and one guy isn't?
I think Texas, I don't want to say is a lock, but I think they're pretty close. I mean, I
Right.
think if they lose this game, they're 10-2. Yes, they've lost to two, pretty good teams. Obviously, one of those being Georgia, but still, I think they're pretty safe. I think Ewers is probably going to gut it out, even if he is banged up on Saturday night. He's not going to miss the other A&M game. But I think the question I think you're asking is, if the pass rush of A&M is getting home and your quarterback can't move and maybe you can't run the ball on A&M, I've been kind of reluctant to make the quarterback switch, but I think if the game is on the line and Ewers is not moving well, I might have to consider giving Arch a little bit of playing time just because of the mobility. Now, I don't want to call for Ewers to be benched because I think he still is the best option, but if he isn't moving well, A&M's getting home like we saw against Georgia. Sark's already done it once. Why wouldn't he do it again in this spot considering what the stakes are?
Any shot that A&M losing last week could be good for them. I mean, the spread went in their favor after that loss. And again, I don't know if it takes any pressure off because this is still a game for the right to go to the SEC championship. I believe it would have been regardless of what happened to A&M. But now, seemingly, anybody that is not rooting for one of these teams, I would imagine most, if not all of them, think Texas going to win, even though it is at Kyle Field. You see one vastly superior team as opposed to a team that just lost to friggin' Auburn. So, in any way, shape, or form, could losing have helped the Aggies?
This is a weird answer to your question. I actually don't read a ton into last week's game just because I think it's hard in the SEC to go on some of these road environments at night and win games. And so the spread was like 2 or 3 points, depending on where you looked, between Auburn and A&M. I'm not that surprised that Auburn won. I mean, we've talked about their inconsistency all season. It didn't stun me that they played well against Texas A&M. So I'm not reading anything into that. I think A&M, whether they want to say it or not, Mike Elko kind of did, they're looking to this game on Saturday night. So I think any kind of look ahead or losing, like, they're focused now because it's clear. Like, you win, you are going to the SEC championship game. And also, I think A&M could play the disrespect card. I mean, they were, like you said, the line has moved in their favor. It's still around a touchdown. Texas A&M is getting Texas at home. They are 8-3. They still are 5-2 in the SEC, and they're disrespected by almost a touchdown at home. So if I'm A&M, I'm printing that out, putting it all over the facilities because, I mean, the odds makers aren't giving them much of a chance here.
Right. And I mean, I think it kind of goes without saying. I know at Michigan was a dominating performance, but really only two other road games, Vanderbilt, which that was quite honestly not as close as the final score indicated. Vanderbilt scored at the very end, and then we're kicking onside to possibly pull the upset. And then at Arkansas, they weren't very sharp. I mean, hell, you won by 10 points. There's nothing to be looked down on in that one. Meanwhile, A&M, they did lose to Notre Dame, but beyond that, they've won some big home games this season. Any shot that Texas is, I mean, I think it kind of goes without saying. That's what this whole season's been about. There's not been a single team aside from Georgia beating Texas that I can think of where two really good teams met in the SEC and the home team didn't win. I mean, I guess this is stupid because we all know the answer, but A&M better at home and Texas not as good as on the road. Do you buy into that?
Yes, I would. And I think you kind of summed it up. It's a season theme of teams playing really well at home. And I think that kind of, like, whatever the spread is, I mean, these Texas A&M could be 4-7 and Texas could be, 10-1. And I still think that this game is probably going to be a little bit closer than the spread because it brings out the best in rivalries. So I think just A&M getting at home, getting past the Auburn game, knowing what's at stake, I think they got a really good chance to win this game on Saturday night, regardless of what the spread says. I think there is a couple, Texas from a defensive standpoint too. their defense has been really good this year too. I mean, I think there's only one opponent that's gone over 300 yards, and that's Florida, of all teams, against without DJ Lagway against this defense. So I think, Marcel Reed's performance against Auburn and the way they threw the ball, I think would probably give me a little bit of confidence too, if I'm A&M, that they can move the ball against Texas on Saturday.
Can't wait for it. Can't wait for it. Game of the night in the SEC. How about this one, Steven? This could potentially another fantastic game here. South Carolina at Clemson. Who knows? This could be a playoff game, Steven. Noon Eastern, ESPN. Clemson favored by a field. I was stunned. Stunned, Steven, I tell you, when I saw that Clemson was favored in this football game. Did that surprise you? And what's your early read on this one?
It didn't surprise me. I think Clemson being at home, kind of to our discussion on Texas A&M, it feels like home field advantage is a big deal this year. And in a rivalry game that Clemson, for the most part, has controlled recently, being favored, not a huge surprise. But Mike, I hope our friends at MyBookie keep this spread at like 3 or 3.5 for the predictions later this week. Hint. So if you want to take a big picture look at Clemson this year, they are 9-2. Only one of those victories came against a team with a winning record, and that was Louisville. Louisville beat Clemson earlier this year. So Clemson's schedule kind of soft this year. They lost to Georgia in the season opener. They lost to Louisville. This is a team that, from an offensive perspective, they have been better than they were last season. Cade Klubnik took a step forward. They've got Phil Maffa, running back, who's pretty good. And their defense, oddly enough, which is pretty good, is probably not as strong as they were in previous years. So I think coming into this game, if you're South Carolina, you're looking at the fact that Louisville ran the ball pretty well against Clemson a few weeks ago. And Clemson's offensive line has been banged up the last few weeks. So Kyle Kennard, Stewart, probably liking their chances of getting to Cade Klubnik on Saturday.
Yeah, this is going to be, again, I'm trying to figure out why in the world Clemson favored the way South Carolina's been playing, but I get it. Home field, rivalry type game. Throw the records out down here. But Beamer has beaten Dabo. In fact, last time they played down there, South Carolina won it. So, do you think, what are the odds? Again, it's probably not in their control, but what are the odds the winner of this makes the college football playoff?
It's a good question. I would say they're fairly reasonable. I don't know if I'd go 50%. I'd maybe go like 20, 30 maybe. Obviously the path for South Carolina is a little tough if they're behind Alabama and Ole Miss, but it's viable if they win this game and look impressive. And maybe to some extent, maybe Vegas just hasn't caught on to how well South Carolina has been playing the last few weeks. Oddly enough, let me throw this out there. Do you think this is Shane Beamer's best team against Clemson? At least in the last couple, I would think.
Yeah, I certainly would buy that.
I think they won last time at Clemson. I think they got a pretty good chance on Saturday.
Will it take any Beamer ball type tricks, or can they go? Can they beat them just manning up and playing? Because again, I still have maybe I should stop having reservations, but I still a little bit on Dow Loggins. But they've been playing better and better and better football, so maybe I shouldn't be questioning them. But going up against that Clemson defense, I've got some concerns there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. If you look at Clemson from a defensive perspective this year, I mentioned they've had maybe a little bit more issues against the run than we're used to seeing. They just gave up nearly 300 rushing yards to the Citadel. Now, some of that may have came like in garbage time when the game was kind of in no question, but Louisville ran for 210. Stanford ran for 236 yards, and Stanford is not a great rushing team. I mean, let me tell you that. So I think there are opportunities here if you're South Carolina between Sellers and Sanders. And to use an expression we have used a couple times here, To me, this is an empty the tank kind of game.
Mm-hmm.
If you got to use Lenore Sellers 25 times on the ground, you have to do it because everything is still at stake for this team. And it is a matchup that if South Carolina can win some one-on-ones up front, they got a chance to move the ball on the ground.
Well, take his name into consideration with this prediction here, though, Steven. Spur your enthusiasm. South Carolina got to line up and simply be more physical, pull away, win by 24 points at Clemson. That'd be glorious. I'd love it. I would love it. But let me ask you this, Steven, because, again, they don't want to hear it. I don't want to see it. But I got to ask the question. You know, all this goodwill, you know, they're on cloud nine. They should go to the hell. You know, I doubt they could find someone saying that this could be a playoff team before I was saying it. But if South Carolina were to lose to this Clemson with this quality of a team, how much of the momentum of the program is a little bit lost right there? Do you, if it, at all, do you think that you think the program suffers any of it?
I don't think so. You know, maybe a touch, but also I think if you get Lenore Sellers back for next season and he's even better than this year, there's a chance that next year's team could be even better. And I think I know we'll talk more portal stuff in the next few weeks, but I think if I'm putting a list of like most attractive teams in the portal, like South Carolina has to be high on that list because you got a good quarterback. You can go out and get a playmaker, receiver. You can go get offensive linemen, fill in the gaps on defense. It feels like there's a chance that this could spiral into really something positive next year. So 8-4 actually probably exceeds most people's preseason expectations, right? So in some ways, I mean, they're an underdog and they've been playing better than Clemson. That should give them confidence. And frankly, you know, like A&M, play the disrespect card because I think they've been better than Clemson for the second half of the season for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think I could be wrong, but I believe the over-under was 5.5.
Yeah.
So they have certainly exceeded that. I cannot wait. This is going to be and this is a great game because, again, these two hate each other. So the fans hate each other. I mean, this is hate fest down here.
How much of this game are you just hoping that South Carolina beats Clemson to see sad Dabo? Is that it?
100% right there. And congratulations, Stephen. Todd says you are back in the family. You've gained it back. But all right, I screwed up. I don't have the graphic. I apologize. But we got the Iron Bowl next. Stephen, thoughts on this game as Alabama is still a large favorite? What is it? I got it as an 11-point favorite here. According to my bookie, 230 on ABC. But, man, I was feeling really good about Alabama in this matchup a week ago. Now I'm not so sure after Auburn gets a big win and after Alabama gets stuffed into a locker by Oklahoma. What's your read on this one?
I think you brought up something important there, which is it's always crucial to not read too much into the last game. You have to look at it in the totality of the season, if that makes sense. And going on the road, if you're Alabama to Oklahoma, maybe they overlooked Oklahoma to get to Auburn because of the rivalry. Like I could see Alabama rebounding here. The other thing we've already seen this week is Auburn's players kind of mixing it up a little bit. I mean, I know if you're Auburn, you're probably like terrified by media relations there. If you're me sitting on the couch with popcorn, you're like, please, let's bring all the trash talk and all the rivalry stuff into it. So we're already off to a great start in this rivalry this week. But I think in the big picture, if you're Auburn, you've already played spoiler once. So why not do it again a second time? And if you're Alabama, you know, you're probably out of the playoff this week. You still have a chance to get in depending on what happens elsewhere. But I think they've got to quickly forget about last week, get refocused, and find some motivation for Auburn because some of these teams that fall out, you wonder what their mindset is. We're going to find out right away, I think, about Kalen DeBoer's ability to get this kind of team pointed back in the right direction for this rivalry game.
But is it fair, Stephen, even after as disappointing as things have been at times for Auburn, I think it's fair to look at both of them and say, okay, we got one program here where the players are buying in, they're still fighting even though they were losing, and it's paying off. And then the other side, it seems like we've got a program still trying to find itself and its players and its coach. And that could reveal itself normally Auburn going to Alabama, good luck, right? But this is a different story. I mean, if things get tough, if things get tight, how will Alabama respond? If it happens to Auburn, heck, they've been there all year. I don't know that it'll affect them. Meanwhile, I think it could crush Alabama. Do you think that those are fair statements?
I do. And I think there are a couple like matchup things too that I would be worried about if I was Alabama. Number one, Jarquez Hunter's been picking up some steam the last few weeks, and of course he ran well against A&M. If Alabama can't stop Oklahoma, Jarquez Hunter's one of the best backs in the SEC. I mean, he could find 130 rushing yards again on Saturday. We know Alabama's secondaries had issues at times too. Here comes Cam Coleman. Here comes Keandre Lambert-Smith. Auburn scored over 40 points in back-to-back games. I know one of those was Louisiana Monroe, but if you looked at like success rate, yards per play, I mean, Auburn's offense has been able to move the ball this year. It's just that the self-destructive moments of turnovers or penalties or not finishing drive have hurt them. So, yeah, I do think if I'm Auburn, obviously there's a bowl at stake, but you could just play loose. Like you're the underdog. You haven't won in Tuscaloosa since 2010. All the pressure's on Alabama. They've got to win this game to keep their playoff hopes alive. There's sort of big picture uncertainty about the direction of Kalen DeBoer's first season. So I think all the pressure in the world is on Alabama. And I think Auburn as the underdog has, they have nothing to lose and they could play loose, and they've got some matchups that I think can make this one really interesting.
I'd hate to be old Kalen DeBoer if I lost this one. You know what?
Man, 8-4, losing to Auburn, getting crushed by Oklahoma, losing to Vanderbilt. Yeah, this is a pretty bad first season. Everything after that Georgia game has just kind of gone downhill, hasn't it?
It has. And speaking of gone downhill, that's exactly what's going to happen here, Steven. If Tennessee doesn't take care of business, oh, Lord, this is classic Tennessee here. On the road, favored by 11 points, noon Eastern, 11 Central. You beat Vanderbilt, you are all but a lock to make the college football playoff. All it's going to take, Steven, you got to beat old Clark Lee, who's not touched you. Yeah, all you got to do is beat Diego Pavia. I don't even know who that was 6 months ago. Yet, here they are, backs against the wall. Man, this game for Tennessee, this feels like danger zone here. Big time danger zone. And, the footballs favor Tennessee, but I don't know. History, there's some bad mojo with the Vols. Am I overreacting over here?
I don't think you're overreacting. I think kind of the theme of the week with rivalry games and underdogs with nothing to lose, and Diego Pavia, the Mr. Chaos agent of the SEC, nothing to lose in this matchup. And I think Vanderbilt could absolutely make this a 4-quarter battle against Tennessee. So I think you look at Vanderbilt from an offensive perspective these last few weeks. I mean, they haven't scored more than 24 points since the Alabama game, and Pavia's been banged up, and they hit a couple big plays against LSU. But for the most part, the last couple of weeks, teams have done a little bit better job of kind of bottling up Pavia. So I think if you're Tennessee, the defensive line's got to win up front. They can't let Vanderbilt sort of dictate the style of play. Vanderbilt's defense is a little bit better against the run than they are the pass. That kind of bodes well to slow down Dylan Sampson. So, in a rivalry game against a Vanderbilt team that's been a giant killer, almost a giant killer against Texas, I would be worried about this if I'm Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. Right. This is another program that doesn't always respond when there's pressure. And that's seemingly what drives Diego. So I don't know. This will be interesting. And teams like South Carolina, Ole Miss, Alabama, they need Tennessee to lose as well. So there's ramifications for many, many teams in just this one ball game. You know what?
Are you concerned too about the road thing too? Because Tennessee lost to Arkansas, they beat Oklahoma by 10, and of course they lost the lead against Georgia after jumping out 10-0. As
I'm not, because I think there'll be, and I know there will be more Tennessee fans
yeah,
at this game than Vanderbilt. So it's not
yeah,
really a real road game. But we did have we had a great comment. I've been saving this one in my back pocket here, Stephen, from Carl. Appreciate you, cousin Carl. If Man, this is how you know he's a Tennessee fan. He doesn't say when. He says if. If the Vols beat Vandy, it'll be 30 wins in 3 years. When will the Vols be considered one of the elite teams in the SEC? Well, you got to finish the deal. I don't think they'll ever get there. If Steve, think about all the teams right now. I mean, no disrespect. I'm gonna throw up Steve. This is oh wait, no, this is the wrong one. Sorry. I'm gonna throw up Steven's projected playoff rankings. I'm trying to think of a team here, Steven, that if you told them, could be any of these teams, all you got to do is beat Vanderbilt in Nashville, and you make the college football playoff. I mean, all the way down to Iowa State, BYU, Clemson. I mean, they would sign up for that, and they'd probably take care of business. So, I mean, there's not on one of these that even Boise State would run from that challenge. So, how do you get to be elite? You win games like it, and not just win them, but win it convincingly, and get to the college football playoff. And again, this crazy year, the way Tennessee's defense been playing, you've got to show up, and this is a playoff game for Tennessee. This is a playoff game. You got to show up in these damn games. You can't get your doors blown off, and if you're able to get to the playoff, you can't get killed either. You know, if Tennessee gets to a second round, I think they will be considered one of the elite in the SEC. What's your thoughts on that?
yeah. It's a good question. Like I look at Tennessee as like the upper half of the SEC. I know that probably recent history hasn't necessarily been on their side. Obviously, they made some really bad coaching hires. But I think if you zoom out from the actual hire and see Tennessee as the job and not necessarily the coach, I mean, they have everything they need to win at a high level. So I look at Tennessee. I mean, I would Georgia, Alabama, Texas, LSU, and some others obviously are probably a little bit like elite jobs, but Tennessee's in that solid kind of second tier of the nation, which is top 10 to 12. So I think that, to your point, Mike, you have to do this year over year. And the 12-team playoff allows a team like Tennessee now where you can lose 2 times in the SEC and get into the playoff pretty consistently, I would think. You also, I think, just look back at kind of 2022, where Tennessee had the opportunity at South Carolina and got massacred by South Carolina. So I think if you're Tennessee, like there's a chance to sort of move past that point, beat Vanderbilt, finish the job, get to the playoff. And if you do that again for the next couple of years, then I think you're talking like a little bit more national respect will be coming Tennessee's way.
Right. And like literally, I usually don't read text on the air, Steve. In fact, I don't think I've ever done this. But we're sitting here talking about this game, so I feel obligated to do this. Just got a text from cousin Shane, who should be watching the program, by the way. I mean, can't even get him to watch his own show. But his brother, Flying Hawaiian, in the text thread. I mean, this is exactly, we didn't plan this, but here's what he says. I'm worried about Vanderbilt next weekend, fellas. He literally just texted, like, while we're saying here. And Shane responded, wrong thread. Pussies are in the other one. So that's where Tennessee fans are at. They're either deathly scared or they're feeling uber confident. That's how you know cousin Shane is a real one and his brother is not. So again, I say all that to say, I don't know. This is Tennessee's history says they'll lose this game. We'll find out if under Josh Heupel, is this a new era or if it's the same old Vols.
I was just about to ask you what's the panic level of cousin Shane, but judging by his text thread, zero concern. He is already looking at tickets to South Bend, Indiana for that first round matchup against Notre Dame. But I mean, Mike, everything is here for Tennessee. It is 60 minutes away from clinching a spot in the college football playoff. And, maybe if anything, if you're Josh Heupel, you can use, like I said, the matchup against South Carolina a few years ago where Tennessee lost an opportunity, but also what happened to Alabama, what happened to Ole Miss, going on the road in the SEC, albeit there will be a very large contingent of Tennessee fans. Last week ought to be a lesson to Tennessee or any of these other teams in the playoff mix. You go on the road and weird things can happen, and especially in a rivalry game where Vanderbilt's got nothing to lose and everything to gain by beating Tennessee and playing spoiler.
Yep. All right. How about this one, Stephen? I mean, so many interesting matchups this weekend. How about, and I never would have thought I was saying this, Georgia Tech, Georgia, Friday game, of course, the holiday and all. Georgia's 18-point favorite at home, night game. I believe this is 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central on ABC. But thoughts on this one? Because all of a sudden, again, Georgia, big favorites. They should win this one. They own this series. But suddenly Georgia Tech's, they look a little bit formidable.
Yeah, they do. Georgia Tech's an interesting team. So they started the year, as probably many of you remember, by beating Florida State over in Ireland. So they've come to a pretty solid 7-4 record. But how they've done it's pretty interesting. So last year with Haynes King at quarterback, they were one of the ACC's better offenses. Haynes King has been banged up the last few weeks, and they've been playing a freshman in Aaron Philo, who has been playing really well. If you watch the Thursday night game against NC State, he led a comeback. It was a big deal for them to get that 7th victory. So they are mixing and matching at quarterback right now. They've got some skill players that were banged up on Thursday night. Not sure if they're going to be able to come back or what's the status yet. But I think the key theme here for Georgia Tech, and it's sort of like a cliche, but Brent Key, their head coach, is all about like toughness, physicality, blue collar mentality. Their offensive line is really good. They've only allowed 5 sacks this year. So that's kind of the style. They're clear underdog. This is kind of the role they thrive in. I mean, they beat Miami just a few weeks ago. Also, very SEC-like at the coordinator spots because Buster Faulkner, former Georgia off-field assistant coach, he's their offensive coordinator. Defensive coordinator, Tyler Santucci, he was under Mike Elko at Texas A&M and at Notre Dame. So he is steeped in sort of some SEC head coaching schemes, and he has, and especially Santucci, they have improved a lot on defense. So I do think, considering how far Georgia Tech has improved the last couple of years, that number against the spread might be a little high. But also, if Georgia Tech has really, depending on what the quarterbacks and the injuries at receiver shake out, if the consistent Georgia team shows up and not the one that showed up against UMass, they'll probably take care of business again.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like Georgia Tech's a little SEC light, is what it sounds like. But this is an interesting spot, too, because, they've clinched already. This is going to sound crazy. Well, I guess not really. But if Georgia could lose to this game, which, I don't think they will. But they could lose it, and they could be fine. Well, they would be fine. If they win the SEC, they get the automatic bid. But just a weird spot to be in this playoff era, where you've got bigger things already clinched, and then you got to play this team that you're a big favorite against. In of itself, there you go, is a unique thing that, quite frankly, we don't see much of that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting this week to see these teams with nothing to lose, like Georgia Tech and Vanderbilt, and how the teams with everything to play for handle these spots. Georgia Tech did play Georgia pretty tough last year. They only lost by 8. It was in Atlanta, so this time it'll be in Athens, so a little different spot. And also, the track record of Georgia Tech being kind of a giant killer the last 2 years would kind of make me nervous if I'm Georgia. I think they're going to take care of business, but that's also the problem here is, like we said, the rivalry. everything at stake, but also the inconsistency of Georgia this season, just not knowing which Georgia team's going to show up. So there's this weekend in the 12 team era will provide us with a really interesting data point because we've never been in this spot before.
Right. You said they beat Miami. Are they the only team that has beaten Miami?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah. So that makes it all the more interesting. Oh, and I did catch a little bit of that Thursday game you were referencing, and I thought it was weird that they were rotating the quarterbacks. Who do you anticipate will be if they haven't announced it already? Will be the starting quarterback, and which quarterback you think will get the most reps in this game?
I think Philo is probably going to end up playing the most snaps. I have a hunch, and I don't know if this hunch is right. Haynes King got hurt a few weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that he could throw the ball very far. And I don't mean that like in a mean, like snarky
Right.
way. I think he's actually still hurt. And I
Right.
think they put Philo in on passing down. So we'll see. I think you'll see both, but I think Philo probably plays the most snaps.
Well, I'd love to see more snaps from Freedom Van because he just gifted a membership to Cousin Gray. Gray, welcome to the family over here. Appreciate your Freedom Van for that generosity. But yes, that's going to be, again, that's a Friday game. Nationally televised. A lot of eyes on you. It's going to be pretty wild.
Also, senior day at some of these places too. So I'd imagine, already adding to the emotions of some of these, games.
Right. And then the other Friday game, Steven, always entertaining. One of my favorite annually, the Egg Bowl. Come on, Mississippi State at Ole Miss. State's last opportunity to get an SEC win. And Ole Miss, what? Their playoff hopes are still alive. I didn't realize. I thought they were dead in the water, but all the chaos it's a slight chance. It's not likely, but there's a slight shot for them to still make the college football playoff. This is a tough game to handicap because of Ole Miss and their what happened to them last week, but they are a 24.5-point favorite. That seems way too high here on Friday. 2:30 Central, 3:30 Eastern. What's your early read on this one?
I think that the big question is what Ole Miss team shows up here, because they have that third loss now. There still is that playoff potential, but it's also a long shot if the committee's projections, I think, play out. So I think, is this Ole Miss team going to show up with 100% focus, even in a rivalry setting? In a rivalry setting that has been just awesome games, weird stuff happening in games, off the field between the two rivalries. It's consistently one of my favorite games to watch this year, or every year. I think all of the motivation should be on Mississippi State's sideline because they're the underdog. The underdog always in rivalry games tends to play well. So I think that point spread's probably a little high. But if Ole Miss shows up, and I think Jackson Dart's probably going to be ready to play like a redemption game after last week, Mississippi State's defense hasn't, given up over 7 yards of play in SEC contests. This is a really tough matchup for Mississippi State. So if Ole Miss is motivated and they show up, then I think they get that 9th victory and keep their playoff hopes alive for another week.
Right. And I was the fool that picked State last week. Steven, what an idiot. What an idiot I am. I hate to give away predictions this early, but it is a 25-point spread. After that dreadful performance, I don't have any shot, even though I don't know what to make Ole Miss. But this just seems like a whipping could be coming here. But I don't know.
Is Eli Drinkwitz yelling at you like?
I think he is. He's probably in the DMs right now, just screaming at me. But this often is a weird, unique game. It's another one nationally televised Friday, of course. So some intrigue here, but in no way, shape, or form can this be considered a successful season for State. But if they get a win, that's something, right? At least you're kind of kicking Ole Miss while they're down and making them feel even worse.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good way to kind of frame this season for Mississippi State is year zero. low expectations, but I mean, it's almost like if you won one game every year, you want it to be Ole Miss if you're Mississippi State. So it would give them a little bit of a boost going into the offseason, and especially just to get that one in the SEC victory column. That would be a big deal for Jeff Levy, because then, hey, you get Ole Miss at your place next year, and who knows what their roster is going to look like next season. So could maybe start a little something good if you're Mississippi State in this rivalry.
Mm-hmm. How about this one? All of a sudden, this is a little bit more intriguing as well, Stephen. But we've got Oklahoma at LSU. LSU, just give them a night game every time. Give them that big advantage, even though they don't deserve it. LSU 6-point favorite, 6 o'clock Central, 7 o'clock Eastern, ESPN. Like I said, LSU got off the mat last week against Vanderbilt, and we all know Oklahoma whooped Alabama. So again, this game's got a little bit more intrigue, doesn't it?
It does. If we play the sort of like transitive property, Oklahoma pounded Alabama, who Alabama pounded LSU. So Oklahoma should win this game going away, right? Just based upon results we've seen this season. But no, in all seriousness, Mike, I think the thing you saw at LSU last week that was encouraging was sort of I don't want to say a complete team effort, but the lack of a turnover was good. You also saw the run game come alive. They gave up a few big plays on defense, but for the most part, I think they kind of controlled that game on Saturday night against Vanderbilt. So now the chance to finish on a high note. They're out of the playoff, but they could improve their bowl positioning. They sort of build a little bit of momentum here for the offseason. And then I think for Oklahoma, they're probably going to try and do what everybody else has done against LSU, which is run the quarterback and see if LSU can defend it. Because Jackson Arnold did this really well against Alabama last week. Can you do it again? I think the hard part about this for Oklahoma is you're going on the road this time to LSU, and the firepower that LSU's passing game has against Oklahoma secondary that's been a little inconsistent. I could easily see LSU having a lot more success at moving the ball than Alabama did.
Mm-hmm. But, we were, again, another topic we were having off here. I mean, the athletics, right? I wouldn't call it a hit piece, but they're doing profiles on Coach Kelly, and it's kind of the theme is he doesn't know how to communicate with his players, and he's not doing a great job. But they need this one. He particularly needs this one because they beat Vanderbilt. They were booing him. They were booing his quarterback. Again, they got it done, but I don't think any LSU fan is going to sit here and be like, yes, beat Vanderbilt. Yeah, let's give that guy an extension. I mean, this is going to be the negativity all off season for LSU. If you lose 4 of your final 5 games, it's just going to be so bad, particularly if 2 of them are night games, Tiger Stadium. Man, aside from the games that have playoff implications, is there a coach that needs to win more than Brian Kelly, you think?
That's a good question. Maybe Ryan Day. Obviously, playoff implications with Michigan. Yeah, that's the first coach that comes to mind, because if you lose to this Michigan team, he's going to have some problems. But no, to your point, I mean, just at the most basic level, 8-4 and 5-3 in the conference looks a heck of a lot better than 7-5 and 4-4. I think if you're an LSU fan and you're looking for some optimism, I think there are 2 things. I've mentioned this before, but Notre Dame went 4-8 in 2016. And then after that, Brian Kelly kind of reinvented himself at Notre Dame, and they reeled off 5 straight seasons of double-digit victories. So maybe this season and what's happened with the portal sort of kind of resets things a little bit. They maybe make some staff improvements and they go heavy into the portal, which it looks like they're going to do based upon what Brian Kelly said today. So there's some encouraging signs, but I think you have to finish the job against Oklahoma. And I would suspect that line between LSU and Oklahoma, I think LSU is probably going to be a pretty sizable favorite come kickoff time still. So if they lose this one, it's not going to be great for Brian Kelly this offseason.
And do you think, last thing I got on this one, do you think Oklahoma found anything against Alabama, I mean, again, I know their offense didn't go wild or anything. I mean, I think they only had like 70 pass yards. It's all they needed, quite frankly. But if they could run on Alabama, yeah, I have to feel pretty confident that Oklahoma can run on LSU. Do you think they found something, or do you think that'll be proven to be more of a one-off?
I think they found something that can work in the short term. I don't know you want your quarterback to run 25 times or so in the SEC. Um, do you know how many times that Oklahoma attempted a pass beyond 10 yards against Alabama?
Maybe just the one drop from the tight end that was a touchdown, or should have been.
I think it's like one or two. Yeah.
Okay.
Based upon how the graded, I think it's hard to win in the SEC consistently if you only have one or two passes that go beyond 10 yards. But to your point, I think at this point, it's the last game of the season. That strategy, I think, can work. I think long term, you got to find something that's a little bit more sustainable. But that's the offseason plan. The goal is just to win on Saturday. And they've been running the ball better since Joe John Finley took over the play calling, too.
All right, how about this one? Getting into some. Oh wait, no. Let's do this one. I'm used to this being on a Friday, but it's a Saturday this season. Arkansas at Missouri. Missouri. Oh man, I screwed up the graphic. Sorry. It is at Missouri. Missouri favored by 4. 2:30 Central, 3:30 Eastern. SEC Network. Them Razorbacks cannot, for the life of them, get over this team. And Missouri's heating up at the right time. What's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, Mike, is Missouri's big plays in the passing game, which were kind of missing earlier in the season, have started to come alive a little bit the last couple of weeks. And I mean, oddly enough, that's Brady Cook getting injured, and seems like they're connecting on more deep passes, which is probably problematic for Arkansas given their issues in the secondary this season. So I think if you're Brady Cook trying to finish out the home stretch as a winner, go out a winner, get to 9 victories. You didn't make the playoff. It's a little disappointing, but there's still a lot to play for here from Missouri. And then if you're Arkansas, there's a chance to get over the hump in this rivalry. Missouri has won 7 of 8 in this series. So yes, getting to 6 wins is nice. 7 looks a lot better. And whether or not it's an official rivalry or where it ranks in the SEC, it's still a rivalry because it's being played on Saturday this year instead of Friday. But it's rivalry week in the SEC, and so to me, these two teams are rivals. And so, if you're Arkansas, it's a chance to get some revenge over Missouri.
Right, and again, I got the Winsipedia up here, but a lot of very, very close results, even though Missouri leads 11-4 here, but a lot of close games. And another thing that stands out to me in the short time as it has been played as SEC opponents, it seems to me that the team, and shout out Caleb, he says Arkansas's never won in Como. How about that? But it seems to me that the team that is the least interested in this one usually loses. And that's usually a lot of times that's Arkansas, but sometimes it's Missouri. And if I had a sneaking suspicion, I would say this year for Missouri, perhaps it means less than it would for Arkansas. So again, I don't know that it has got anything to do with this matchup, but it's just a weird trend. And also the fact that it's always on Friday and now it's not. I mean, if I'm Arkansas, I like that too, particularly because we're on the road this week. You know, making the schedule even a normal schedule as opposed to having to hit the road even earlier. Maybe that screwed with them too in the past. I don't know, but the fact that we're changing things up a little bit, and the fact you've been dominated, I have to feel like changing is could help in some degree.
I totally forgot that the last 2 games played in Columbia were decided by 2 points each. I mean, this has been kind of a strange series to some extent, and like you said, the motivation angle for whichever team shows up and motivated. This is just kind of a big picture thought, Mike. I like the games on Friday after Thanksgiving. I wish we had one more. We could do like a triple header of SEC games. So I'll take 2, but I'll be greedy, and we should have 3. So.
I think Cousin Shay said that recently. He wants 3 on Thursday, 3 on Friday, and then like whatever 4 or 5 on Saturday. Which for sitting on your ass and watching games like we do, that is ideal. But I don't know if that's ideal for anyone else. But that's how he wants it. So sign me up.
There's this thing that the NFL is also on Thanksgiving with the Lions and the Cowboys, so that might be a little tough. I mean, shoot, I remember when Texas A&M played on Thanksgiving. That was like one of my highlights of the day.
All right, how about 2 more here, Steven? Florida State, red hot Florida, hottest team is side of South Carolina. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it, Steven. I had heard all the rumors. I had heard all the legends. I don't watch Florida State. I watched the first game. I saw them get embarrassed on national television. And then I basically just heard that they're awful. And then I did this graphic and I was like, good God, they were not lying. I mean, this is the worst efficiency data I have literally ever seen for a Power 5 football team. I mean, Florida is favored on the road by 13 in a night game in Tallahassee, and probably 13 is not enough.
I agree. It's probably not enough. I think Florida State will have some pride, and they probably will show up to play, but all the matchups in this game favor Florida here. I mean, the bottom has just dropped out for Florida State in one offseason. They may start, and I think actually they are going to start a true freshman at quarterback, much like Florida. Luke Kromenhoek took over the starting job last week, and he's got some talent for sure. The problem for Florida State is they don't run the ball well at all. Their offensive line is bad, and their receivers are not very good. Their defense on third down is atrocious. I think offenses convert about 45% on third downs. So they don't stop the run. They don't defend the pass particularly well. They don't get off the field on third downs. I don't mean to be snarky by saying this. They actually have a really good kicker and a really good punter. So if it's a low-scoring game, they might be able to keep this one interesting because of their special teams. But that just goes to show you how big of a lift this is for Florida State. It's not just Florida State's problems. It's also how well Florida is playing. And a big part of that is Lagway, the rushing attack, and also the way Florida's playing on defense right now too.
Yeah. So if Florida gets to 7-8, it might be too much for Florida State, huh?
Yeah, I think it's tough. When every week when I sit down to go over all the games, I tried to chart out a path. Like, how could Florida State win this game? And I mean, you look at their scoring in the ACC. They scored 3 points against Notre Dame, 11 against North Carolina, 14 against Miami, 16 against Duke, 13 against Clemson. I mean, they won. They scored 14 points and they beat California back in September. I mean, they have not scored over 20 points or over 25 points against an FBS opponent this year. So yes, to your point, if Florida gets like 17 points, that might be enough to win this game.
I'd hate it. I'd hate it for those Seminoles. They still haven't recovered from not making the playoff. You know what?
Also, definitely on that part, there are some SEC transfers over there at Florida State, like Malik Benson, who played at Alabama. Roydell Williams, he's been banged up. He may come back on Saturday. So they got some talent. It just hasn't worked out, like you said. They have ever since that Sunday where they missed the playoff, it's been downhill for Florida State.
Now I am fully, let the players get paid, let them transfer. I've never said anything I think against that. But the only negative, well, I mean, there's several negatives perhaps, but the one that applies to games like this, like just those guys you just said, Benson and Roydell, like, do they care about the Florida State series? I mean, how could they? You know what I mean? They've never even played in it. And I don't know. I mean, so now that we're in this era, I think we lose a little bit, and it's not just that. I should have mentioned that with like Ole Miss, Mississippi State too, with just particularly Ole Miss, how they're like bringing in all these guys. I don't think there's going to be a hatred for the Egg Bowl like there was in years past, and maybe in some regard that's a good thing. But I sure do love all that hate.
Oh yeah.
when these teams play. You know what?
Oh, 100%. I mean, so many of these games, like the pregame scuffles, the scuffles start the
Right.
game. I mean, it's just like this is like you could print it out and show somebody this is what rivalries in college football are all about. So I think you do lose a little bit of that. I thought maybe you were going NIL and transfer and wondering about effort sometimes because that may be a problem over at Florida State. Just
Oh yeah,
yeah,
I have heard the rumors. So
yeah.
last one here, Stephen. Louisville at Kentucky. Kentucky owns these Cardinal Birds, whatever the heck they are here, Stephen. But Louisville's favored. Not too surprising given the season Kentucky's had, but 3.5 point spread, noon Eastern, 11 a.m. kick on SEC Network. Kentucky has won 5 in a row, though. So how about that? Thoughts on this one, Stephen?
I think Kentucky's got a chance to win this game. I think first of all, Louisville can score. There's no doubt about that. Jeff Brom, their head coach, is great about generating offense. They are 7-4 this season, and they have lost all of their games by one score, and that includes Notre Dame, that includes SMU, that includes Miami. 3 potential playoff teams. They are just inconsistent on defense, and I think Kentucky can run the ball on Louisville. And I think that'll take the pressure off of Cutter Boley in his first start. So I think if you're looking for a path here for Kentucky, it looks a lot like the Ole Miss game, some of these others, the Georgia game. If you can run the ball, shorten it, keep Louisville's offense on the sidelines, there's a path here for the Wildcats. But Louisville, very much a high-powered offense with an inconsistent defense. And the question for me is, can Kentucky continue its dominance in this series, or is all these questions about Kentucky just too much to overcome, even with their advantage recently?
Right, losing to Florida, that was one of the feathers in Mark Stoops' hat that was gone. This streak going the other way, man, that'd be bad. You know what? Because of all the negativity, it's just going to amplify. You know, this was their best win last year, wasn't it? I mean, did they have a better win? And this year, I guess still you could say the Ole Miss win was maybe better, but I mean, it just derailed Ole Miss is what you really did. It didn't save your season like you had hoped it would, but I think big time pressure on Stoops to win this game.
I did too. Yeah, you're right. Last year, Kentucky beating Louisville was its best win because they beat Mississippi State, Florida, Vanderbilt, Ball State, Eastern Kentucky, and Akron. And really, I mean, you look since the second half of last season, 2 victories and 6, so 2-6 in their last 8 games last year. And you combine that with this season. I mean, I know it's like basic math, but like I said, 5-7 looks a heck of a lot better to me than 4-8. You're just missing bowl game by one, by one victory. So a win over a rival, plus maybe Cutter Boley plays well. Maybe it gives you a little off-season optimism if you're Kentucky. If you lose a home game to a rival that you have dominated and you don't play well, I think that's the bad vibes continue into the offseason.
Right. And I don't know if you've seen any of this, Stephen, but there's been speculation. Brad White could be leaving for other jobs. There's been speculation that the tight ends coach, recruiting coordinator Vince Morrow could be a head coaching candidate at places like I think of Southern Miss, maybe. Yes, but again, I don't know if those things are accurate or not. But the fact that these guys' names are being attached does not strike me as they're either one of two things. They're maybe not confident that Mark. Well, I mean, quite frankly, that Mark Stoops may not be there much longer, and whether that means getting fired or retired or what. But it seems like some guys out there looking for options, if that makes sense.
I was gonna say fleeing the ship is probably a little bit too strong, if you will. But it does feel like if things were a little better, you do wonder if those guys would be looking for a job. Like they've been loyal assistants to Mark Stoops. So it feels like things are a lot less stable than they have been, except that I don't know if Kentucky will be willing to pony up for Mark Stoops' buyout anytime soon.
Pony up. Clever what you did there, Steven. Hey, one more. I apologize, Jordan. I missed this super. He says off topic. Answer later. LSU, they lost the quarterback commit Underwood. Money going in a portal. I think what he's saying there, instead of giving this kid money, are they going to spend it on portal? Perhaps, but I don't know about you, Steven, but for the future of the program, I'd rather have a quarterback. But for Brian Kelly's sake, you better allocate that money to probably defense, because if you can get Garrett Nussmeier back, I think that's your best shot. Even that probably is your best shot next season to having a good roster, unless this kid is really, the next DJ Lagway type that could come in there and revolutionize your program. That's an interesting question. So the fact they're losing him, do you think they'll allocate that money to help the roster?
I think they will. So Brian Kelly said on Monday that they're going to go into the portal, and I think that means they'll be using some NIL dollars. And also, I think, regardless of what Brian Kelly thinks about that practice, is that the rest of the SEC is doing it. And if you're not doing it, you're missing out and you're going to get beat. So you better get on board or you're going to get left behind, essentially. I just, out of curiosity, while you were going through that question, I just wrote down, I just kind of went through what positions I think LSU, and I cut to 5 in sort of portal and recruiting that they really needed to hit. It's like line of scrimmage. You could maybe bring in a running back. They may need to restock at receiver, defensive back. You get the point. The point is they have a lot of roster issues they need to address. And I think the only way you're going to beat out some of these SEC teams or teams, like an Ohio State or, whoever contender, you're going to have to go into the portal or recruiting trail, and you're going to have to pay for that. So I would suspect that maybe that just gets divvied up among several players as opposed to just like a Bryce Underwood. Now, if Garrett Nussmeier doesn't come back, you have a little bit bigger question at quarterback. At least if Nussmeier comes back and you can bring in some additions on both sides of the ball, I think they got a chance to, still be a pretty solid top 25 team next year.
A lot of unanswered questions. Like even last week, Steve, we were here and Kiffin was letting us know, man, we're as healthy as we've been. We got Trey Harris back. We got Prisley back. We might even get Logan Diggs back. It was all looking up. We were singing the praises. Now I don't know if you saw the presser today, Stephen, but he's basically getting called out for not playing his running back, and he won't give a straight answer why. Rome is burning. Wild time, Stephen. And next week it could be just the same for someone else out there. It's a wild time. You know what?
It is, man. It's been such a unpredictable ride this season in the SEC and college football as a whole. And I go back to, the things that you and I talked about in the offseason, which is the conference realignment, no divisions. There's been, there was 30 plus coaching changes last year, 20 something, I think the year before. So, whatever 40% of college football has changed coaches in the last X amount of years. And you have the portal, you've got all this roster craziness. So rosters, coaching, conferences, schedule, playoff format are all different than they were 3 years ago. And it leads to this unpredictability, which it makes it fun to watch, but sometimes trying to figure it out is a very difficult assignment.
Well, that's why we got you, Stephen, the college football encyclopedia. Before you go, can you remind everybody how to follow you, how to find your work?
Absolutely. Over at athlonsports.com is where all my work is at. So you can check out playoff reaction later this week or bowl projections as we change them throughout the week if any intel comes out. You can also follow me on Twitter at athlonsteven and at StephenLCFB over on Facebook and Instagram.
All right, Stephen. Well, we appreciate you as always. We appreciate each and every one of you for hanging out. What a time! I appreciate all the trolls, all the positivity, all the negativity, all the fighting. It's Thanksgiving. That's what family's all about: fussing and a feuding, watching football, and having a good old time and eating some great food. I'm gonna have to ask. Well, you'll be back. You'll be back on Wednesday to make your picks. I might ask you a couple Thanksgiving questions over at the Steven house. So
yeah.
Until then, we'll catch you on the next one.
Hey, buddy, this beer's for you, Mike, and Cousin Shane. That SEC podcast loves the Pirate, and the Pirate loves that SEC podcast.